So this first study is about empathy, and it's about how it was essentially a literature review looking at how it can be learned and the impact of empathy training. And the impact of empathy training. So the questions here is, what is the impact of empathy training on those in the healthcare field? Does experiential or humanistic training provide better results? Are the theoretical models presented coherent with the dimensions evaluated? And the methods used here were the authors conducted this systematic review of this available research from 2000 to 2017. Once evaluated for the correct criteria, the final sample for the systematic review was settled on 23 articles, including 4 other systematic reviews. And the review of these articles was focused on evaluating the design of the study, empathy measured, whether it was experimental or humanistic, what the results were, how long the duration of the study was, and what the study's quality was. And the authors did notice some disconnect between the theoretical frameworks proposed in the studies and the dimensions that were trained versus those evaluated. They also noted how it would be helpful to understand how the patients that ultimately benefited from more empathetic healthcare professionals and not just focusing on self-evaluations from the study participants, as well as understanding timeframes that these trainings are most effective. So the results from this are that the majority of the studies evaluated showed an increase in empathy as a result of the of these interventions, and primarily on these experiential interventions. 15.78% of studies evaluated were focused on human sciences interventions and trainings. The studies that did not necessarily show an increase in empathy did seem to have some improvements in at least one aspect or one area related to empathy. And then at least one study suggested that empathy learned can decrease over time. It was also shown that humanities-based interventions overall showed very big impacts from the training on the participants' empathy, but the authors also took note that there are potentially some areas to be improved in the studies themselves. And so the key takeaway that Natalie took away from this is that empathy can be taught to improve and be improved within people. There's no really cut and dry way to do this. And both experiential and humanities-based trainings and interventions could be useful, although this current research does support experiential training maybe a little more heavily. And so I think it's interesting to look at, that empathy can be learned and can be used for preventing and resolving conflicts in some cases. So, I thought this was an interesting one.
I was literally just reading something the other day, and I don't remember what it was, if it was in a book I'm reading or not, but about the same notion that empathy can be learned in like different ways of teaching people empathy. This is interesting.
Yeah, that's something I brought up. Remember in that book that I shared on Monday?
Yeah.
That book about empathy.
Yeah.
The whole premise of the book was that empathy can be learned, and that there was that interesting part was like, even just suggesting that empathy can be learned to someone actually makes them more prone to empathy. So
interesting.
That's kind of, what did you read? Oh, Natalie read this one. Okay. I'm just curious as to like what the humanity-based interventions were different than the other interventions.
Yeah, I'm looking at this. I'm pulling up the study right now because I was interested in that too.
Because I was thinking, well, can't you have an humanities-based training that's
experiential?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of like how our trainings are. I would kind of put those in to a certain extent, like that category.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But Jeremy, just to speak to what you shared the other day and what you just shared now about just identifying that it can be learned opens up like brain pathways. I don't know that will have someone kind of be more prone to allowing it to happen. Just knowing that it can, like knowing that you.
Yeah.
I guess that's like. Well, that's not, because I've heard that same that same sort of concept be used in the other way too, right? Like, if you acknowledge that something can't be done, or like, or
Yeah.
just, especially when it comes to conflict, right? Like, like the first step is acknowledging that conflict is not necessarily something bad, right? And so reframing that, and then that's going to open people up to more constructively working through conflict if they reframe how it, like, oh, it's not something bad, right?
Yeah, it's like optimism is one of those first principles that you kind of have to use as a framework when you're going into conflict. Like there is something here for us. There's an opportunity.
Mhm.
Just suggesting that opens up a space for collaboration or resolution.
Yeah, it looks like well, going to your question on experiential. I don't have the full article here, but it looks like that they focused on the effectiveness of experiential empathy interventions, and so they mention here that empathy training using simulations, role playing, and feedback are more effective. So I'm assuming that that is the experiential side of things.
We might just naturally have, I don't know, integrated the two. I don't know. No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Yeah, there's a lot of studies too, just on experiential learning, and just how much more effective that is for all different learning styles, not just like the analytical learners, but all. Like, so being able to like incorporate different activities, which is like what we take that into consideration with our trainings too, right? Like, let's have a little bit of lecture, right? A little bit of information, a little bit of role plays, a little bit of, self-reflection. Like, so incorporating all of that into a training or an intervention, I think is very, very important to adhere to all different learning styles.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's the general concept of practice. Like, how do you get good at anything? How do you change your behavior or improve your behavior on anything? You got to practice.
Yeah.
You got to do it. Yeah.